welcome back to Series 2 of Unmuzzled at 67. Now we're on episode 2, and this episode is called The Miracle Child. So let's do a quick recap. Here I am, 8.5 months pregnant, living in a flat in the West End because my parents have asked me to leave the house. Fair enough. Do you know what I mean? Fair enough. So if you're sitting comfortably, I'll begin. One night, a friend was visiting me in my flat and she left maybe about 11, something like that. She says, you know what, Christine, I'm going to jump down to Great Western Road and get a taxi. Because it was literally 5 minutes away from my flat. I said, do you know what, I think I'll come with you. I've not even had any fresh air really the day. So down we go. She gets a taxi almost right away and I start to walk back up to my flat. And I notice here on the left-hand side of me, there's one of these huge, big, kind of old mansion-type houses that's been made into flats, and there's a party going on over here. And I can hear all the music, and you can see the people coming in and out, and that's fine. It's a Friday night. So, but I also noticed something, it's hard to explain this, that kind of darted from one side of the building to the other, just further. And it seemed to be a little bit further up. So I couldn't figure out what it was. I just know I saw a sudden movement of, must have been somebody. It was too big to be an animal, I think. So I'm just walking up to my flat and all of a sudden a guy appears in front of me. A fairly young guy, but he's not drunk. There's no smell of any drink off him. But clearly, I think, just, out of it completely. He's wearing black and he's got on a black beanie hat and he just pushes me like that and onto the pavement. Really a fucking crack in my back, So he starts to lift up my skirt. In those days, you wore kind of maternity dresses. People don't seem to do that now. You'd actually go and buy these big maternity dresses. But don't forget, I was 8.5 months pregnant. So I wasn't a big pregnant thing, but I needed lots of room. So for me, time just stopped. I think it's just your brain trying to catch up with what is actually happening. Not saying one single thing. So this is the part about divine intervention. From inside me, I would say maybe the bowels of my soul, a voice came out of me. Now, I've never heard that voice since. I never had heard it before. The voice was a man's voice, right? So, as God is my judge, this is what happened. So I'm going to try and do the voice for you just now, but I won't succeed. But I want to give you an idea of what it sounded like. So while this guy's trying to push my dress up and I'm trying to pull it down, this voice came out and it said, wait, I fix my throat. Don't you touch my voice is good. Don't you touch my baby. But it was deeper than that. And it was, sometimes when you see these movies and the devil's speaking, I would say that if that's what I had to compare it to, that was it. So I'm as fucking shocked as him that this voice, where did this come from? So the guy jumped up. I think he maybe thought I was a drag queen or something, you know what I mean? Certainly a man in drag. Must have thought it was a man anyway. The guy jumps up and he starts to run in the opposite direction. And I fucking jump up and I'm starting to run, fucking running after him. Then I thought, what are you doing? What are you actually doing? What are you going to do if you catch up with him? If at 8.5 months you actually catch up with him? What are you going to do? He might bar you. What are you doing? So I had to calm down, had to haul myself together and get, just sort of walk back up to my flat. It was fucking shaking like a leaf, absolutely shaking like a leaf, and still no understanding. sort of thinking, fuck's sake, maybe I've got a fucking double personality here. Where does that voice come from? As well as being completely rattled by what had happened, just absolutely random, completely out of the blue, no build up that anything was going to happen. So it gets up to the flat. Of course, I'm looking behind me all the time, thinking he's going to turn around and come back to get me. Get into the flat and burst out greeting and all that, just shocked and never slept. Every time I shut my eyes, I could see this young guy's face in front of me. So I didn't sleep at all. And I phoned my pal in the morning. I said, oh, fuck, I've not slept all night. I told her what happened. She says, Christine, I'll need to come and get you. You'll need to go to the hospital and get checked to make sure your baby's all right. And you as well. So around she came, we got up to the hospital, and thank God we were both okay. And the women in the hospital that looked at us said, would you consider going to the police? Do you think maybe you should go and report this? I said, I don't really know if I could cope with that. I'm just so rattled. I'm so, my nerves are shattered. She said, I know, it's a big ask, isn't it? She says, but maybe you could think about it, because, that guy might do that again, and he might do that to somebody that doesn't jump up, and he might do something worse. I said, yeah, okay. And I said to my pal, we'll get in the car, do you know what, let's go to the police station. If anything happened to anybody, I would never forgive myself knowing I hadn't made that effort. So we go to the police station and we report it. And the policeman says, I've actually had another couple of reports about that kind of thing going on in that area. Would you be prepared to come in and take part in an identity parade? I says, fuck. I said, oh, I don't know. I said, it'll be next week. And then I thought, I have to do it. Again, if anything happened to anybody and I hadn't taken my own responsibility, then that wouldn't be the right thing to do either. So I went and I did the identity parade, and I did pick him out. He was, so I went and I picked him out. I said, listen, going to no contact me anymore. Can I just be left out of things now, because I'm about to give birth here. I need to, I need some time just to, get over this and prepare mentally myself for what's going to be happening here. And I don't want involved anyone. They said, right, okay. So my friend decided behind my back to phone my parents and let them know what had happened. So she dropped me off at the flat, and shortly afterwards they turned up and they asked what had happened, and they could see I was in a real state, I was really, really upset. And they said, right, get your stuff, you come home with us and you can stay with us until your baby is born. So thank God for them. It was a great feeling to be safe and secure, to be looked after, just to be a daughter again, and actually just not to be alone. So the end of 1984, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. And straight away, the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. My mum and dad took me and my son home with them, and they helped in every single possible practical way. Newborn babies often don't sleep during the night, and my mum would be there on the night shift, and she would be those days we had to wash nappies. I had no money to buy disposable nappies, so we had to wash nappies. It was in the winter when my son was born, so it was really hard going. My dad didn't have that much involvement, except that to let my mum and I sleep, he would take the baby out in the pram, a big pram, and he would take the baby out for a walk, even in the cold. And in fact, I remember a happy memory when my father came from the Highlands, and he wrapped the baby up in a tartan blanket thing that we had. And my father was very interested in astronomy, and he's holding the baby up and he's pointing to all the different stars and things. And I thought, oh God, I wish I'd had a mobile phone to take a photograph of that, because it was just one generation showing another generation, the cosmos. So they helped, both of them helped. I would never have managed without them. I was hopeless, absolutely. I needed propped up all the time. And don't forget, these two people had just retired. They were wanting to have a nice, quiet life. They weren't wanting to be part of the team bringing up a newborn baby. And I always will be eternally grateful. As I say, I would never have managed without them. So like most new mums, it took me a good few months to get myself better. But I was skin, I had no maternity pay, and I needed to get back to work as soon as possible. But one day I was coming back from party, got off the bus, just about to walk towards my mum's house, and this man stopped me and he says, "Have you got the time, hen?" Now, that was a very common thing to happen then. Number one, nobody had mobiles, or very, very few people had mobiles. And number two, people didn't have watches. So it was a common thing for people, men and women, to say, "Have you got the time?" And you'd look at your watch, because people wore watches then and say, "Oh, it's such and such a time." So it wasn't a worrying or anything like that thing to do. It was a very normal and ordinary thing to ask. But I just froze, and I could feel beads of sweat coming down my forehead and actually down my back as well from my neck. And I couldn't move. I was just standing there and just staring at this man. And he says, "Are you okay, hen? Have I said something wrong? I'm really sorry. Are you all right? Are you okay?" And I still couldn't speak. So he ended up going away saying, "I'm really sorry, hen. I don't know what I've done." And, and off he went. And I once he had gone, I got myself squared up and back in the house. Never mentioned it. Maybe about a week later, I was on a bus and a man sat beside me, and I felt he was too close to me. You know how sometimes men really have their legs out quite wide, and his leg was touching me, and I was absolutely, again, this beads of sweat, but this is more like a panic attack. I had to get off the bus, and so I managed to get off the bus quickly, get some fresh air, and I was okay. I thought, fuck's sake, what's the matter with me? There's something not right here. So I go to the doctor. He says, "Listen," he's quite an old doctor too, maybe in his 50s, maybe even early 60s. He says, "We're doing something new here at this practice. We're doing hypnotherapy." He says, "And I think for you, this could be just the very thing for you." Oh, I says, "How does that work?" So he gave me a brief explanation. He did one session with me and booked me in for 6 sessions. So I suppose I was quite pleased. I didn't want to be taking, medication or anything like that, So surprise, surprise, even by the second session, I could see how quickly I had been speaking, how quickly I'd been walking, how my shoulders were hunched up almost to my ears. And even by session 2, I was really, I really felt a benefit. So by the time the 6 sessions were done, I was brand new. I thought that was absolutely brilliant, and it really worked for me. And that was gone, and it never ever happened again. So I was feeling a bit more like myself, and I started to look for jobs. Got a job working part-time back shift as a cleaning supervisor for a cleaning company in a hospital in the south side. And the women I worked with were absolutely fucking brutal. I clearly had to prove myself, because my background was hotel cleaning, and their background obviously was hospital cleaning, and they would say that people in hotels were just playing at it. So they were very confident I would not be able to do this job. And actually they were right. Hospital cleaning is entirely different and far more detailed, and using big machines for all those corridors and theatres and things like that. So there was a lot of things that I had to learn. And because I was the new one, they would say that you need to make the tea. Never actually used my name. They said, "Right, you have to make the tea." So anything I did was completely ridiculed at this point. So if I when I was making the tea, I would be handing the tea out, and one of them would say, "What's the matter with you? Fell out with the coo?" And I'm just looking in complete, no idea what they're talking about. What they actually meant was, "You haven't put enough milk in this tea." And then when they were having their tea, and they would be sitting enjoying it, and they would say, "Oh, it's great to get your laughing gear round that," and I was just ready for it. So there was all this stuff going on, and they took no fucking prisoners at all. But in time, I did win them round. I mean, I had to, be on top of my game pretty quickly, and I did win them round, and they were the funniest women. You know, they said things I'd never ever heard in my life before. They were typical Glaswegian women, unconscious comedians. But despite getting a job, there was a sadness inside me. My mood was low almost all the time. Of course, you know, outside situations could lift it, but there was this kind of constant feeling of hopelessness and, you know, and feeling depressed. And although I temporarily was lifted by, you know, some of the funny things that these women would say, I would go back to this kind of hopeless feeling. And I was desperate to tell someone how I felt. And I told my mum. And this was her response. You're what? You're depressed? Don't be ridiculous. Any woman would give the right arm to be in the position that you're in. You've got a job. You've got a lovely, healthy baby. What on earth could you have to be depressed about? So that was that. That was that conversation shut down, dismissed, and never, ever mentioned again. But remember, this was the 80s, you know, this was 40 years ago. And that was how many people of my parents' generation thought. Don't forget, they're the ones that had come through the war, you know, so they were quite hardcore. Eventually, it did turn out that I had postnatal depression. And unfortunately, it took me 10 years to get diagnosis. So I was still going to AA, and I met a guy from Bearsden, a white BMW, and a good job. And my mother said, that guy has not to fucking escape. That is the one. You got to net ruin him. He is the one for you. Of course, his parents did not think the same. I am not what they had in mind for their son. Not at all. A single parent, living with my mum and dad, no prospects. But despite that, we got engaged. And we very quickly booked the wedding and we booked the reception. And once we'd done that, the guy started to disappear. So he would be saying, oh, come round to your house as usual on Wednesday, for example. And he just wouldn't appear. And he wouldn't phone. And I think he had a mobile phone, or he had one in his car. But, you know, I would be phoning his house saying, is he okay? Because he's not turned up. And the mum would say, I've got absolutely no idea, Christine, you know, where he is. At that point, I never knew whether she was kidding on or not, because she didn't like me and she didn't approve of us, and she wasn't keen in any sense about the wedding coming up. So that happened a lot. And then when he did reappear, it wouldn't be a day where you weren't expecting him to, and it was all becoming quite random. There was all these red flags beginning to appear. And I was beginning to think to myself, what am I going to do here? This just isn't right. How can a guy want to marry you, tell you he loves you, and at the same time disappear? And when you asked him, where have you been? Why were you not able to come when you said you would? You know, sort of explain yourself kind of thing. He would always give something very vague, a very vague answer that didn't really mean very much. So although the engagement was on, it was off, it was on, it was off, the red flags were too much for me, and I decided to cancel everything. So I cancelled the wedding, I cancelled the reception. I decided that I was better off alone, because what kind of life was I going to have with a guy like this? And actually, he disappeared and I never saw him again, not even to this very day. So the engagement ring you'd given me, which was a lovely engagement ring, actually belonged to his mother. And although she wasn't that keen on me, she had consented to give her engagement ring. And I thought, well, I'll need to give it back, you know. So I phoned the house, went up to give it back, and she said, Christine, that's very decent of you. Thank you so much, because I wasn't really very sure if you would do that. I said, well, you know, perhaps it has happy memories for you. It certainly doesn't have happy memories for me. And in the end, it was your ring, and we're not going to get married now, so it's the right thing to do. And she said, honestly, I really appreciate that, Christine. Thanks very much. So when I went back and told my mother, she went, what? You what? You should have had that at the pawn. You could have sold that. You'd have probably got about four grand for that ring like that. I said, listen, that would never have brought me any happiness if you... Oh, she says, don't fucking give us that. What's the matter? I don't know what's the matter with you at times. You've no got any money. There was your chance. Get the women's ring, get it sold and this and that. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. That's no the right thing for me. So that's that to bed. Shortly after that, I did get back to work in hotels. And I stayed with my parents for quite a good while. And I made a plan to buy a house near one of my family, but away from my parents. And I was finally able to put down a small deposit for this very small house. Now, I'm going to explain what it was like in those days to get a mortgage. So in those days, some people got 100% mortgage. You could get a 98 or 99% mortgage. Almost anybody, if you could provide a couple of pay slips, and I was working in this hotel and I was back to working full time. So it really was quite easy to do. So I thought I'd covered all bases, I thought I was really organised. I thought I had childcare organised for my son. Was quite far outside of Glasgow. But I had just not taken into consideration the hours that I would be working in a hotel. Even although I had become a boss now, it really didn't make a difference. If you worked in hospitality, somebody would turn up and you're het now, you had to go on. So I was often very late picking up my son, and the childminder would be angry and say, look, Kristen, we can't keep doing this. This is my family time now. And of course, my son was upset because he was sitting there and, feeling awkward. So hotels were not ideal, not for me and not for any single parent really. But I needed the full-time work. I needed the money to pay the mortgage, and just because I was on my own. I would sum it up like this. Responsibilities, massive. Commitment required, massive. Hours worked, massive. Wages, anything but massive. I just hadn't really thought this through, and I was stressed to the max. But then an opportunity came up to work in Aviemore with a 2-bedroomed flat with the job. Up I go for the interview. Boom, we're off to Aviemore. Another new start. This seemed the answer to all my problems. But straight away, my son didn't settle. He missed his friends, he missed his grandparents because they had practically brought him up. And he was bullied at school because of his Glasgow accent. And when he went back to Glasgow in the holidays to stay with my parents, he just really didn't want to come back. So this maybe about a year, maybe just over a year. So reluctantly, we had to return. I couldn't bear to see him so unhappy. He was unhappy. He never settled, but I was loving it. I had a social life. I had nice people to babysit him, a lot of young people around me. And the job was quite good. I loved having my own wee flat. I mean, it was a lovely wee flat. It was fully furnished But, like all mums, your child's happiness has got to come first. So that was the end of that. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I had met a guy. He was 22 and I was 35. I was the talk of the steamy, of course. But my son got on really well with him. And so we all moved back to Glasgow. I sold my house and got a flat quite near to my parents. My mum, of course, was horrified that I would have a relationship with such a young guy. She said it was obscene and she refused to meet him. But his parents, on the other hand, were all for it, and we actually got on really well and would go out quite regularly together. But truth be told, I was always a wee bit worried that my young boyfriend would be lured away by a younger woman. But that's not actually what brought the relationship to an end. What happened was that he got in with a hard drinking crowd and he started to go to the casino after work. Not to gamble, but to drink. And sometimes he came home at 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and sometimes he didn't come home at all. And then when he did come home, he was always pissed. And his drinking escalated until it became intolerable for me. I was a recovering alcoholic myself, and this was very dangerous territory for me. And we parted ways. Meanwhile, I was finding less and less time for AA meetings. I was becoming a wee bit disillusioned. I wanted AA to give me the tools to be present in the real world as a recovering alcoholic. And I was beginning to find that AA was becoming my life and beginning to say, this is a wee bit like a kind of cult. I'm not very sure about this. So I stepped back, stopped going to meetings. Here was a big test for me. Could I function without the meetings, the practices and the guidelines of AA that had kept me sober? Let's see. But before I bring this episode to a close, I want to say that there is purposely no mention of my son's father, as he did not play a role in our lives, and there is no name reference for my son, as this is my story, not his. So thank you, as always, for joining me. Join me next Wednesday. Remember, we're always on a Wednesday for episode 3. And if you're enjoying the podcasts, please tell your family and friends. The more, the merrier. Thanks for your company. See you next week.